I always like to start with this picture when I'm talking about studying political behavior. This is a photograph I took in Assam. So basically what happens during election time, as many of you are aware, different political parties try to plant their flags in all kinds of random places. The children found all of those flags and started chasing each other with them. So we had them stand up and just sort of give us their best pose and show us a little bit of what they had in front of them. This was an election that the two main combatants were the BJP and the Congress. But I want to I think the reason why, and Purvi talked a little bit about it in the introduction, the reason why I want to start just thinking about politics in this way. I think we're used to talking about politics, thinking about politics, interacting about politics in terms of the leaders, in terms of elites, in terms of IAS officers sometimes. We don't actually talk about citizens. And it's quite awkward if you think about it, because we always talk about India being the world's largest democracy. And the other thing that we know, and I won't spend any time on it today, but I often sort of present, is just the sheer amount of electoral volatility that exists in India. Which tells you that for all of the power that we believe that caste holds and a leader holds and so on and so forth, those are all stable and constant factors. They don't explain the kind of volatility and the kind of change that we see in the electoral system. So when I think about politics in India, I ultimately just think about voters and how are voters forming their opinions. And we live in a world with a huge amount of information, now increasingly a huge amount of fake news as well, as we're finding out. How do people sort through all of the different signals that are coming towards them? So before I sort of go into a discussion of two states, UP and Gujarat, I want to sort of very briefly foreground with some analytic results about what happened in 2014. So as most of you know, the BJP alone, I'm not talking about the NDA, won 282 seats on 31% vote share. In 2014, while actually just 5 years earlier, the Congress had won 206 seats on 29% vote share. So there's two things we notice. We notice that there's severe volatility in seats between 2009 and 2014. And we notice that a very small vote percentage converts to a very large number of seats. There are 543 seats that are contested in the Lok Sabha elections in 2014 and 2009. If we were to go down to the state level, electoral volatility tends to be even greater than what we see at the national level. And what's important to note is that when we think about consolidated Western democracies, a sort of phrase that a lot of people use, we don't see this kind of electoral volatility. So what we're really seeing is that there are huge shifts taking place in the electorate on a regular basis, and we're trying to make some sense of what are the kinds of things that are creating very dramatic shifts in the electorate in very, very short periods of time. That's really the best way, I think, of thinking about how to work on elections. Okay, so here's just a very simple synopsis. Everything in saffron is where the BJP won. It contested 428 constituencies in 2014, won 282 of them. It had about a 2/3 strike rate. So strike rate is the number of seats you win divided by the number of seats you contest. Now, here's the kind of mental math that I always use. And if we want to really start thinking about where the 31% equal 282 seats came from, think of these 6 states: Bihar, Gujarat, MP, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, UP. The BJP has over a 90% strike rate in these states. Almost 70% of all of the seats it wins in the election come from just these 6 states. There are other states the BJP did well in, right? But now let's consider 5 other states, and later on I'll do a quiz of pretty obvious what's similar about each of these states and what's different about them. But AP, Kerala, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal, the BJP won 7 out of 101 seats, strike rate of 7%. It's only 2% of the seats the BJP won. So we're talking about extraordinary regional variation. If you want to see it in a map, I've just broken the pieces down. You can see that those 6 states, that's what it looks like, and the last 5 states I showed you, that's what it looks like, right? Very little saffron here. Lots of places that BJP loses. Lots of places BJP doesn't even contest. In this stretch, which is Hindi belt plus, we see almost everywhere the BJP contested it won, and it contested almost everywhere. And by the way, this is not pure lecture. Please break in with any questions any time. I'm going to be throwing a lot of stuff at you just to see what sticks. Hopefully get some people happy or angry or whatever. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about thinking about what is explaining in 2014 this sort of massive shift that we're seeing in the electorate. We talked about in 2009, the BJP didn't do very well. In 2014, it's a landslide. So we often talk about the Modi wave, right? The Modi wave is that now Prime Minister Narendra Modi had the ability to bring new people into the system, create a swell of support for the BJP that wasn't there before. In order to sort of understand the empirical parameters of this, let's look at the turnout change between 2009 and 2014. So turnout change means what is your turnout in 2014, and you subtract off what is the turnout in 2009. So 10% increase in turnout, 20% increase in turnout, something like that. Okay, so let's take a quick look at what happened here. When the turnout changed between 2009 and 2014, I'm looking at the graph on the left, was less than 5%. The BJP's strike rate, I don't know if constituencies won, but should be strike rate, is 24%. When it is more than 5%, when there are more than 5% of people turning out, the strike rate is 81%. So you can see that there's a huge, huge shift when there were many more people coming out to vote from 2009 to 2014. So on the right, I've used a statistical technique you'll see again. I'm not going to explain the statistical technique, but it's a penalized spline, so it's a very sort of complicated. If for any sort of complicated function, it allows you to fit with some level of precision what's going on. What you see is as the turnout change goes from -5 to 25, the BJP's probability of winning constituencies shoots up like a rocket. And as we start hitting around 5 or 10, that probability of winning shoots up around 65, 70, 80%, right? So you're just getting this huge increase in the probability of winning as more people are turning out, right? So as more new voters are coming into the system. So what's the next question one might have? Who's coming out? Where are they coming out, right?
What factors affect the turnout change?
So that's exactly what we're going to. So I'm going to talk about two separate factors here. So one is the partisan environment, and one is regionalism. Talk a little bit about it.
And how do you calculate probability?
Probability is just literally whether you won, right? So you can imagine that.
It's a frequency.
Huh?
It's a post factor. It's not a.
Yeah, it's post factor, right? So you won 0 or 1. If you lost, you got a 0. If you won, you got a 1. And I'm just simply modeling the probability of getting a 1, right? So after the election results are there, I look at who's won.
It doesn't depend on number of people contesting.
So this is just a bivariate relationship. But in general, it won't. I'll tell you that. I mean, number of people electing is not quite going to do the job in terms of what explains prediction. We can talk a little bit more about more complicated models that predict, who wins and how. Okay, so I've skipped a lot of stuff from. This is a series of papers I've written around 2014, so I'm skipping a lot of this information. But I wanted to sort of give some sense of how the partisan environment mattered. So I considered a party to be competitive if it was one of the top 2 finishers. You can use any other kind of proxy, but it's just a simple one, right? So because we're in a system where usually 2 parties have way more votes than everyone else. And so I looked at environments in where the BJP was competitive, either against the Congress or against some other party. And you see that the average increase in turnout is almost 10 percentage points or even more if you're competing against Congress. And it's a part of the analysis I've sort of skipped out, but the BJP in particular did very well when it was competing against the Congress. There was a lot of anger against the Congress in 2014. Where the BJP is either not competitive or where it didn't contest, you see that there's very low turnout increase. So what this suggests is that there really was a sense in which when it became apparent the BJP had a chance of winning in my particular constituency, that really did bring voters out to the polls. So here's a heat map on the left of changes in turnout. And on the right is that old map of who won. Now you can see they almost look like, they look very close to each other. The only place where there's some discrepancy is there was an increase in turnout in Orissa, and the BJP did not do very well in Orissa. But otherwise, if you look at these maps, are remarkably similar. If you just spatially look at where there's a vast amount of red, where there's large increases in turnout, and where the BJP won. Right? In some sense, I don't have to run any crazy statistical model for you. The map sort of does all the work. So here's a sort of final point I want to make. I want to sort of, I could do a quiz before I go here, but do people remember the 6 states I gave you where the BJP got 70% of its seats?
Yeah.
What are they?
Bihar, Gujarat, MP, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and UP.
What are the 6 states to the left here? To the left of this graph?
Bihar, UP, Maharashtra, MP, Rajasthan, and Gujarat.
They're if I take the 15 largest states in India, they're the 6 lowest turnout states in India. They're also the states that show double-digit increases in turnout between 2009 and 2014. So when we really think about associating this relationship, we're talking about a very concentrated regional phenomenon, where we're talking about huge increases in the number of people coming out to vote, and of course giving the BJP victory at levels that we haven't typically seen. Now, do people remember the 5 states I named where the BJP did really poorly? So exactly, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Orissa, Tamil Nadu, right? So there are 5 of the 6. So Assam is there creating some problems, right? But otherwise, 5 of the top 6 are there. And you see there's very little increase in turnout in those states, right? They are among the highest turnout states in India. So can someone sort of give me some idea about why the states, those 6 on the left, might be different than the 5 on the right? What's the very obvious difference between them?
The 5 states, to my right, or the governments in those states are basically of regional parties.
Regional parties. And what are regional parties? Why are they regional? What are regional parties associated with?
Regional parties are basically either they're non-Congress, non-BJP.
Right. And what language do they speak in these states?
Other than Hindi.
Yeah. Right. So these
Basically,
are.
it's a Hindi belt where it's most of votes were concentrated for.
And so bonus points. Why do you think that the turnouts are so much higher on the states on the right?
Yeah, I turnout states in any case. Kerala is just gone up by 1 point.
Yeah.
Rather Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, but on average, these are much higher turnout states.
Yeah, they
Why?
generally are high turnout states.
Why are they high turnout states?
Oh, that's some other ways. Yeah, I guess they have higher political involvement, higher political engagement.
So, one. I'm sorry. What?
I have a question. So, can we say that even though the 5 states on the right, left have less turnout, but the population size, considering the population size of those states, that is comparatively larger to the states on the right. So, can we say that, or compare the two, the lowest turnout rate of those states could be equivalent to the highest turnout rates of those other states on the right?
So in numbers, that's certainly true. Although you have like West Bengal is a fairly large state.
What is Andhra?
Andhra, this is remember undivided Andhra, so it's actually quite large.
Also, doesn't make a difference of the seat suffix. Number of seats in each case.
So I mean, the basic parameters of what's going on here is where there were vernacular movements, you tend to get regional parties, but they also mobilized a lot of voters. So what's important here is that the BJP has become very good at picking up reservoirs of voters who were unaligned from the system, who felt like they weren't a part of the system, right? So that's why you're getting these huge increases. In states that are, I'm sorry?
Sorry, the only difference is Karnataka actually. Is K stands for Karnataka?
Yeah. Yeah, Karnataka is that weird
It's a
state.
very weird state because it has a huge increase in turnout, and yet it's not the BJP which completely dominates it.
That's right.
And so what's going on in Karnataka?
So Karnataka is sort of our middle case state, right? If you look at everything left of Karnataka, the BJP is sweeping. If you look at everything to the right, right, it's your litmus test state.
Cusp.
Yeah, it's a cusp state. It has slightly, it's not a double-digit increase in turnout, but it's still fairly high. And it's a state that has BJP Congress competition, but it's still somewhat vernacular in its politics, right? So it's a cusp in a number of ways, you know. So, but broadly, in the vernacular states, you have a lot of political mobilization that comes through the vernacular movements. Turnouts are just much higher. The BJP was, at least in 2014, not very good at converting people who were already politically committed. They were very good at picking up reservoirs of voters who were not very politically committed. And that's what explains a lot of the sort of regional variation that we're seeing. Okay. Huh? 15 is great. Okay. So this will allow me to spend just a little bit of time talking about UP and Gujarat. And I'm going to show you an overall map. I think when I pulled this map, the BJP had not won all of the seats that it was going to eventually win. But I think the BJP wins a total of 325 eventually, right? Or 403. Okay. So I'm now looking at the most recent state election in UP. What we know is that the that the BJP swept, right? It won at levels that very few parties have won at the state level. And it was mirroring a kind of result that we saw in 2014 where the BJP had nearly 90% strike rate in 2014 in the national election in UP, which is also very rare. And so what I've done is I've taken this data, and you can actually break it down to the assembly constituency level, even for national elections. And there were 7 phases in the 2007 election, and I've just taken that set of constituencies and looked at the strike rate for the BJP in 2014 and 2017. Now what you can see is that it's almost identical all the way through, and then there's a drop in phase 6 and phase 7. We have some UP Wallas here. UP Wallas, what were phase 6 and 7? Do people remember? It was in the news quite a bit. Phase 6 is Gorakhpur. Phase 7 is Varanasi. What is interesting is the CM comes from phase 6 and Modi does his roadshow for phase 7. So despite the way that the media sort of played it, and now we know that there was a lot of dissension in Gorakhpur when we looked at the bipolar results recently. This is actually something we were picking up earlier, even when we did our field work. That actually Yogi Adityanath is not as popular as people think, even where he's from. And there was a lot of sort of frustration that we were picking up. Obviously, it's still a fairly large strike rate, but it clearly was more frustration than what was seen in 2014.
This is assembly segment wise.
Yeah, assembly segment wise. Yeah. Both of them are assembly segment wise. Okay. So I'm not going to spend too much time on theory, and I've used sort of fancy words, particularistic politics, and so on and so forth. But here's the basic idea I want to get across, and I'm going to read a passage from something I'd written in the Hindu. So I used to be writing in the Hindu through many of these elections, and I was writing larger working papers. So I'll sort of read a little bit of observations I made at the time before we knew what the election results were going to be. And I'm going to sort of try to tie it to some larger thinking about politics and political theory. So when we think about the BSP and the SP, it's actually on one level very surprising that the BSP and the SP have held on and did hold on for as long as they did. They are two parties that, at least in terms of common imagination, actually serve a very small percentage of the population. At least in stereotype, the SP serves Yadavs and Muslims are actually quite split. And the BSP serves Dalits, but particularly Jatavs, right? But you can see that no matter how I break this down, between the two parties, we're talking about 40% of the population. And that's being split between two parties. So, however you want to, obviously there are other groups there, right? But this suggests that there was always an opportunity for counter-mobilization, right? It's actually a very small percentage of the population that's thought to be being served. So there was a language of particularistic politics that was associated with the BSP and the SP, which is say the SP only serves certain caste groups, only serves Muslims, BSP only serves certain caste groups, only serves Muslims, whatever, right? It's a language that we heard a lot in 2017 and in 2014 as a form of counter-mobilization against the BJP. And I want to sort of theoretically think about what that means and what it means for political mobilization. So I'm going to read a few passages here from what I've written out of UP. In the small cantonment town of Babina, about 20 kilometers from Jhansi, we join an ongoing conversation inside a tailor's shop. It's a diverse group, Hindu and Muslim, forward caste and backward caste, and some are voting for BJP while others are voting for BSP. But nobody's going to vote for the SP here. Village after village has emptied out due to Yadav terror. You can go 2 kilometers from here and see for yourself if I'm lying, whispers a Muslim tailor. He alleges that local Yadavs, under the cover of SP rule, have aggressively seized land from the locals. The fear is palpable. As a Yadav elder walks by the shop, everyone goes silent. Akhilesh has done good work. This is Akhilesh Yadav, who was the chief ministerial candidate. But we can't have an SP candidate win from him. I'll have to vote for the BSP this time, says the tailor. Mr. Yadav, the incumbent chief minister of UP, went to the polls showcasing his development work, and he remains highly popular across a broad swath of the population. His slogan, Kaam Bolta Hai, the work speaks for itself, aims at building a narrative around economic development and popular government-run programs. But Mr. Yadav has a problem. Whether fair or not, his party's organization is still largely associated with Yadav domination of the local bureaucracy, police, and social structure, and ruling through fear and violence while diverting resources towards their own caste. So later in the piece, I talk about a person I've met from the Rajbhar community, which is an OBC community. The Rajbhar man looks up again from the bicycle he's working on and says, "We need someone like Narendra Modi, who is with all castes." This language is not unique to the region. In Farrukhabad, next to a bridge over the Ganges, we meet a small shop owner from the OBC Lodh caste, who complains, "Hamari ginti nahi hoti," we're never counted, bemoaning the fact that his community is not explicitly counted in the caste religious arithmetic of BSP and SP. Like the Rajbhar family, the shopkeeper's hopes ride on the BJP. The popular view of the BJP from the ground is of a party that does not see caste and certainly does not work for a single caste like the Jatavs or the Yadavs. This is an extraordinary reversal from the politics of the 1990s. The electoral rise of the PSP and SP was built upon a narrative of upper caste domination of the bureaucracy and of parties like the BJP against which subjugated groups like the Dalits, OBCs, and Muslims had to forcefully assert their power. Today, many of those same backward classes seem more willing to ally with upper caste than with Yadavs. A final comment is the last paragraph I have. It's a stark reminder that politics is a way of eventually catching up with political science. While Jatavs, Muslims, and Yadavs are numerically large groups, even combined, they are far from a majority of the population of UP. And these groups largely split their support between two parties. In the long run, a party logic that only distributes to a defined small fraction of the population cannot sustain the broad coalitions across caste and religion required to win elections. It's a principle that is showing its teeth at a most inconvenient time for Akhilesh Yadav. So, something I wrote during the campaign trail, but as you can see from the electoral results, there are reasons to believe that it happened. I'm going to just very quickly go through some numbers that I think will be consistent with some of the themes I've been talking about, and then I'll move to Gujarat. So, what I've done here is I've taken the aggregate vote share of major parties in UP in the state elections, and that is your BJP, Congress, BSP, SP. But at least those four. Now, what you will notice is until 2012, you still have more than 15% of people voting for small parties, independent candidates. That number jumps up massively in 2017. It's again that phenomenon of the BJP being able to swallow up unaligned voters. And you see that actually vote shares for other parties moved in ways that we expected. What we didn't expect was that the BJP's ceiling was as high as it was in the state elections. So you're again seeing this phenomenon. This is not actually just a UP phenomenon. In every state election we've been analyzing, we've been seeing this massive consolidation in vote share for major parties. There was some discussion that the BJP got Muslim votes as well. That's not true.
Can you go
So-
back one second?
Huh?
Yeah, one second.
Yeah.
Right.
The,
Percentage Muslim, is there any district with more than 40%?
Yeah. This is I've delimited. In fact, there are many districts. There are districts with more than 50% as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've actually taken those out because the strike rate is obviously very low.
So it's 83 and less than 40%.
Yeah, and 66% strike rate went 40 to 50%. This is the exact same graph, again using that funny method. The red line is 2014, the blue line is 2017. You can see it's remarkably similar. The only thing I want to say here, this is the percentage of Muslims in the district, is there's this funny hump around 30%. Why is that hump happening? So the strike rate is weirdly going up when the Muslim percentage hits about 30-35%.
Fragmentation of Muslim vote, right? It was split two ways.
Right? But it could have been split in smaller percentages, bigger percentages.
And yeah, well,
And
I
polarization.
have a theory, but I'll wait for yours.
So this is
Because I believe they managed to consolidate the non-Muslim vote on the basis of,
that's
the other,
the
right?
correct interpretation.
and they managed to split the Muslim vote at the same time.
This is some of the clearest evidence we have that Hindu-Muslim polarization is yielding electoral dividends, right? You see, there are ways of breaking this, make it actually even less complicated, but no matter how you make these kinds of graphs, when you have an intermediate percentage of Muslims, you see the BJP doing very well. When it's very high, obviously polarization is not a great tool because there are too many Muslims in the area. And when there are too few Muslims, polarization is not a great tool because it's not as effective because it's not people's lived experience. But at intermediate levels, it is yielding certain electoral dividends. It's something that we're seeing sort of consistently in a lot of data that we run. Just going to introduce very quickly. Again, there was this sort of idea that all of the Jatavs just defected from Mayawati and voted for the BJP. That doesn't seem to be true either. Okay, so what I've done now is from the census, you can't get explicit caste data, but what you can do is you can figure out what the percentage of the population that is neither Dalit nor Muslim is. So as a proxy for upper caste and OBC populations. And so what I've done is I've broken down the districts that are less than 40% of that population and more than 60% of that population. And you can just look at the huge increase in the strike rates in 2014 and 2017 where consolidation took place. You can see that in 2012, nothing really happened. I'm just going to mention a quick theory here, and then we'll move on to Gujarat. You know, a lot of people said that in 2007 that somehow Mayawati had magically created an upper caste Dalit alliance. The other argument is that if I know that the only two options are SP and BSP, I have to strategically vote for one party. And for people who study politics, almost certainly that's the explanation. I've never bought this sort of Dalit Brahmin alliance. I can't imagine, based on what social interaction on the ground in UP is, what that would actually even mean. Okay, fine. So I want to just very quickly talk about a very recent election, Gujarat. Gujarat, the BJP is still in power. It has been in power in Gujarat since 1995. As we know, now the Prime Minister was also the Chief Minister of the state at some point. It's had an extremely stable coalition between 1995 and the last election, winning between 115 and 127 seats out of 180. That's incredibly stable, right? Always winning the same thing. It has very much played up the banner of Hindu identity and built cross-caste coalitions. So there was a reason to believe that this would be a complete cakewalk for the BJP in Gujarat. It's one of the states that it dominated in 2014. The Prime Minister is Gujarati. It's a state that's been controlled for a very long time. What we know is that the BJP had a lot of trouble this time. I'm going to very briefly, I don't have enough time to talk about the phenomenon of Hardik Patel. Hardik Patel is, as you might guess, from the Patel community. He is a caste leader. He's a real political superstar. He has a huge following in Gujarat. I want to talk a little bit about how he morphed as a political character. He very much came up to the system as a caste leader, demanding reservations for the Patel community, which is a powerful community in Gujarat. But by the end of the campaign, or let's say even about 3 or 4 months before the election, he sort of became this working class, agricultural class hero, fighting for jobs, fighting for farmers, and really dropped the reservation demand, dropped a lot of the Patel-specific demands. And it's sort of a very interesting shift in rhetoric. And that's the kind of thing that actually started interesting me in terms of what was happening in Gujarat. So what we want to understand, so it is absolutely the case that caste matters a lot in Gujarat. Certainly when Hardik Patel came up as a caste leader, the BJP was saying this is just some caste game. So one wants to understand, why did Gujarat end up like it did, and why did UP end up like it did? After all, the Yadavs are also a powerful caste community. I know I'm can you sum up?
almost.
Okay. So give me about 7 minutes. I'll be done. So I want to make a distinction, and I'm not going to talk about the other 2 points here, between caste patronage, the kind of model I talked about in UP, and caste mobilization. And I think the best way I can do that is to talk about something I had written in a working paper during the election day. We also visited Radhanpur constituency, where Alpesh Thakur, a leader of the Kshatriya Thakur Sena, is contesting the election on a Congress ticket. As a nod to the strength of the Thakur population in the constituency, the BJP has also fielded a Thakur candidate. In a village on the outskirts of town, we meet a young Thakur auto rickshaw driver who would be supporting Alpesh Thakur due to his work in the villages in the recent Gujarat floods. He made clear distinctions between national and state politics. Modi ji is like Mahatma Gandhi to me. He is a great man, but the people under him here in Gujarat are crooked and do nothing. He further complained that the agents at the mandi who buy jeera, the main agricultural product in the area, are largely patilars and refuse to give Thakurs a fair price, instead showing explicit favoritism towards other patilars. But when pushed on what he thought of Hardik Patel, the young auto rickshaw driver responded, "Naturally, he's doing work for his community, but he's a good man and he's with Alpesh. My issue with the patilars is different." While there's obvious friction between the Thakurs and the patilars, this conversation demonstrates that at least for some portion of the population, the sort of language being employed by young caste leaders has the capacity to stitch together disparate caste communities. Here, the various leaders are using caste identity and caste networks as a tool of mobilization for more general demands, rather than as a tool of caste patronage. So I want, so for those of you who know a little bit more about the Gujarat case, there were 3 caste or community leaders that people were talking about quite a bit. Talking about Hardik Patel, they're talking about Alpesh Thakur, they're talking about Jignesh Mevani from the Dalit community. What's interesting is on the ground, all these groups really, really hate each other, right? But it's interesting that they were all able to coordinate and work together and build a coalition behind the Congress. A lot of it has to do with staying on message, and a common message. And that message was around farmers. These are some numbers, these are some strike rates. Okay, so you can see, if I just look at 2012, where the BJP is winning, and I look at 2017, the green is where Congress has won. There's a very obvious difference, right? It's this bottom left quadrant. I'll ask in a second what's special about that place. It's called Saurashtra, exactly. So one thing we know is that there was a lot of mobilization around the rural community. If I look at the strike rates in the big cities, there were about 4 or 5, and I'll have to go back and see what my list was. The strike rates are identical between 2012 and 2017. Where you see a slipping of the strike rate is once we move outside of the big city. So what I did was I looked at the proportion of the assembly constituency which is urban. And again, I used that funny stats method to predict BJP's strike rate. And what you can see is that in 2012, yes, there is an urban bias, but it's far less pronounced than what we end up seeing in 2017. I'm going to just zoom in on this a little bit here. You can see that it eventually converges as we get to a sufficiently urban population, right? But in very rural populations, we're actually getting a much lower strike rate for the BJP, suggesting that there was much more urban-rural, there was a much stronger urban-rural divide. And so one of the things I did, and let me just sort of explain where this idea comes from. So how many of you are familiar with Gujarat here? Any of you? Okay. What is so special about, there are farming areas everywhere, right? Can you tell me what is the one major city in this area? In Saurashtra? No, that's not everywhere else? Rajkot, right? And every other major city you can name is?
Highlands South.
Yeah, it's in this stretch.
On
So,
the axis from
so what this
Bharuch
means,
to
exactly,
Ahmedabad and beyond.
that's right? So what this means is that stretch, there's one city, it's not even that huge of a city, and everything else is rural. And that's where we're seeing this sort of big difference. It's also a place where cotton and groundnut matter a lot. There's certain crops that matter. Where there's proximity to a city, we're not seeing those effects. And we actually didn't see much effect in terms of BJP. You can just see, I mean, There's some change for Congress. Actually, it does a little bit worse in the north, right? But it's remarkably similar. Saurashtra, where there's a big difference. So what we want to understand is that you can be a rural area and that you don't live in a city, but your proximity to the city still gives you some part of urban culture. That's very different than what you might see in Saurashtra, where if I'm rural, I'm really, really rural, right? And my way of sort of thinking about how to capture that is I went into the census and I captured the percentage of the population that is either agricultural cultivator or laborer in the population, right? So you can be rural but still have a few number of agriculturalists, right? They could be commuting to the city. And what you find is that when the agricultural percentage is less than 50%, the strike rate's not changing very much. But look at what happens to the strike rate between 2012 and 2017 to the BJP once we're talking about a population that's more than 2/3 agricultural. And so you can really start isolating where the BJP got itself into trouble, right? Question ultimately for larger politics is whether it can be replicated on a national level in other states. Hardik Patel is a very unique character. But I think that the reason why I talk about these cases and I want to foreground with 2014 is that you can sort of see that there are different logics to who turns out. There are logics to the way the BJP is gaining its vote share. And there are different logics to what the BJP can and cannot mobilize against when it comes to caste politics, right? And I've given a slightly complicated presentation and I've sort of laced it with some of my field notes, but I'm hopeful that this sort of gives you some sense of the parameters of the debate that we're talking about as we go into the next year in 2019, and people talk about the farmer divide is mattering, certain caste groups mattering, certain linguistic identities mattering. And we can start seeing, when we look at two states, the BJP is supposed to have performed well, and one where it really did, and one where it really didn't. And start thinking about why that might be the case, and what that might be telling us for the future. Thanks.
I would, your analysis of the strike rates especially kind of interesting. And I had done this for the previous election years, 91 onwards. And the story of the BJP since then is that they are unable to shed that hardline image that they acquired post Ayodhya, and their kind of their aggressive campaign for that on that issue. So 91 onwards, I see what the strategy of the BJP is that they are trying to get alliances working, but in the absence of getting credible allies, they are contesting as many seats as they can. So 91 they win, I think, 120 seats, and 96 they win 165, and 180 in the next one, 185 in the next, and through this entire sequence of contests, they are contesting fewer and fewer seats, meaning that they are improving that strike rate to something in the region of 56%, but managing to get on board allies and kind of pooling their strength, so getting a viable majority within Parliament as part of a coalition. But here, they've obviously hit upon a different strategy. They've put forward their most kind of their most militant phase as the spearhead of the campaign, and they have contested 428 seats, which they have not since 91. I think 91 was the last time that they contested 400 plus seats, and yet they have hit a strike rate unprecedented. It's like 65. I think the best that they achieved till then was 50, in the higher 50s. Yeah. So does that represent that the overturning of the old calculus, that the more moderate you are, the more allies you can get on board, the greater your chances of winning? And now there's a reward for an extreme projection of views. There's an electoral reward that you can reap. Or was the strategy to the campaign perhaps didn't make overtures of the Hindutva rhetoric? They focus more on neutral goals like development and upon the ineptness of the Congress. Those were the two main campaign elements of the campaign rhetoric that they employed. So was it that despite having a spearhead who was associated with their most kind of militant and most uncompromising and intolerant kind of political streak, was it that it was in a way it was a dog whistle to their followers, and at the same time there was a sufficient camouflage around that to attract more possible voters onto their platform, you know. So that's one issue. Maybe you'll have something to say on that. The second point is that in the UP context, you didn't give us the estimate of turnout. How much did turnout affect the change in the vote share of the
State election turnout was very similar.
similar, is it, between 2009 and
No.
12 and 17?
I think so. If I don't remember,
Okay.
if I remember, it wasn't a huge difference in turnout.
Okay, because BJP was placed third in 2012, well behind the BSP. SP came in first, of course. The BSP was just a little bit behind the SP, but substantially behind in terms of seats, half, I think. BJP was well behind, both in terms of vote share and how did they kind of vault over these two and increase their vote share to 40%. Of course, the answer is partly in that they broke up the strategic alliances that Muslims had with both these parties, and I think in 2012, for the first time since independence, in all assembly elections, the Muslim share in seats won was roughly commensurate with the share in population. It was in the range of 13%, as against 18% in the population as a whole. So for the first time, I think, you know, they never had such a impressive performance, and that they achieved despite being pulled two ways between the SP and the BSP by, I guess, strategizing at the local level how best to deploy their votes so that it doesn't get split and ultimately work in favor of the BJP. So yeah, how did they vault two places in that pecking order and emerge at the top of and by a substantial margin? I think they got 15 points more than the SP Congress combined, or probably 14% more, 14%, and about 16 percentage points more than BSP. So fragmentation of the opposition vote is one part of it, but how did they manage to gather so many votes onto their own platform? And then, of course, Gujarat agrarian distress is a factor that affects the entire country, and the last 4 years has done nothing to alleviate that situation. So, what does that kind of foretell for next year's election contest? Because Gujarat is among the most urbanized states in the country. Very few other states have that level of urbanization. So the rural-urban balance in most other parts of the country would be much more tilted in favor of rural. So if this dynamic continues into other parts of the country, then would you say that the BJP is staring at the possibility of a significant setback next year? I mean, I know that predictions can be hazardous, and I will not compel you to make one, but in a small group, we can have that conversation.